Calumet Editions, an eclectic publisher of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, introduced a new business model nearly a decade ago, in which the publisher and author work as equal partners in a joint venture. Their stable of authors have won numerous and prestigious prizes across literary forms. Where traditional publishers fail to see the value in projects, Calumet cooperates with his authors in realizing a book's potential.
Welcome. Writer's Corner is back. Alan Miller with you. And with us today are two of Minnesota's very finest writers. We're really fortunate to have them both on the same show. To my right, David HOUSEWRIGHT, who is an Edgar Award-winning author. He has won 3 Minnesota Book Awards, president of the Crime Writer Private Eye Writers Association of America, and his 28th book is coming out in, I believe, July. Is that correct?
Actually, it's 29th, not that
29th?
Not that we're keeping track.
Well, we are keeping track. And on my left, Matt Goldman, who started out as a stand-up comedian from the University of Minnesota. For some reason, he went out west, where he won Emmys for the Seinfeld and Ellen programs, and he's now in his Nils Shapiro books, among others.
Mostly standalones now. Yeah.
Mostly standalones, okay. You know, it's funny. In 2022, I wrote a novel about water. It was about the water crisis. Mm-hmm. You both have books coming out now with water in the title. So why don't we talk about that? Tell us about your book, which is coming out Tuesday. We're here in the end of May.
The book mostly takes place up at Leech Lake at a fictitious resort. It's about 2 siblings who grew up at that resort. They're Irish twins, only a year apart. They never got along. They do not like each other at all. When one graduated high school, she moved to the East Coast. When the other graduated high school, he moved to the West Coast. And they have a brother who's half a generation older, 13, 14 years. And the book starts when they get a call from their brother's wife. And she says, "Your brother Mac has died of a seizure." And this call comes from Chicago. 5 minutes after they get off the call, they each receive an email from their dead brother Mac saying, "If I die, no matter what it looks like, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't natural, I was murdered." And how he did that was he thought someone was trying to kill him, so he scheduled an email to be sent to his siblings the next day. But every day he woke up alive, he bumped it to the next day. So when he died, the email sent automatically. And they go back to Chicago for the funeral. They look into their brother's claims. They hear some other strange things, and they decide to go up to Leech Lake, where they're from, and investigate their childhoods and families' past to see if any of it's true.
And you can purchase it as of Tuesday.
As of I don't know when this will air, but as of May 21st. Yes.
Now, David,
I like that idea. No, I'm going to, yeah. All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Man in the Water.
Yes.
That's coming out.
The water aspect begins with Nina Truler, who's married to Mackenzie, the protagonist of the show, of the book, finds a man in the water. He drowned at a marina on the St. Croix, very early spring. And it just becomes, who is this guy? Why was he in the water? Why was he at the marina? And one question leads to another, which leads to another. And it involves people who served in Iraq, Desert Storm, and it involves a lot of different characters.
And somehow or other, Rushmore Mackenzie ends up investigating all this.
Well, it was his wife who found the body. And nobody can explain it. So he goes, well, I got nothing else to do.
Now, we were talking briefly before we went on, and I asked you both, how do you handle writer's block? And both of you said, to my surprise, that you never encountered writer's block. So why is that? And what do you suggest to people who do?
Well, I think we both came up in disciplines where you weren't allowed to have writer's block. I came up as a television writer. Television has shoot dates. It has 200 people on a production waiting for your draft so they can get to work, designing sets, costumes, finding locations, all that. And you really just weren't, you had to stay as long as it took, as late as it took to get the job done. And so that doesn't mean I haven't had bad days. I have days, especially as a novelist, where I have some wiggle room to have bad days. And the way I deal with it then is try to get away from it a little bit and just walk around, tell myself the story, see what pops into my head. That's usually the way I solve it, yeah.
David?
Well, I was trained in newspapers for reasons that still baffle me. I worked for the Minneapolis Tribune sports department when I was 18 years old. This is before it merged with the Star. And, you know, you're covering 9-man football in Fergus Falls or AAU swimming or Big Ten gymnastics or whatever the big guys didn't want to cover. And the game's over at 10 o'clock and your deadline is 10:40. You know, you're not going to call your editor and say, well, give me a few minutes. No. I think the best way to deal with writer's block is to understand what you need to do. And this can get into an argument about whether you use outlines or not, but I always, when I wrote my first novel, I was running an ad agency in St. Paul, and I was putting in 60-hour weeks. So I outlined my books. So when I had time to write, where I could sit down, I wasn't staring at the screen going, you know, what was I thinking? I always had something in front of me. And as a result, I've always been able to just sit down and write. And I agree with Matt, sometimes you have really awful days, where maybe you write for a couple of hours and you look at what you wrote and you go, well, fortunately my deadline's not 10:40, yeah. I can delete that and do it again. But yeah, it's kind of a discipline, it's kind of a training. The guys I think who have writer's block are the ones who sit down and just start writing. Because they're 10, 20,000 words in, or maybe less, or maybe more, and they stop and they're like, they don't know what they're writing, and that's because they never thought of it that way.
Yeah, I don't outline. I am one of those guys who just sits down and write. But I think because I worked on 500 episodes of television or thereabout, I've never counted the exact number. I just developed a sense of story, so I can feel when I'm getting off track. It's usually there's something wrong with the story. That's usually the problem. Your characters aren't being true within that story, and it feels off. That's usually the problem. So, you know.
I do outline, and with what I'm working on now, I just hit a spot where I thought, this outline is not working. And I really just had to stop and really rethink where I was going. And it took a couple of days before I hit upon something else. And, now we go forward. How many hours a day do you normally write when you're not playing hockey?
It really depends on where I am in the book. I know this sounds absurd, but I spend a lot of time thinking about the book I spend a lot of time working it all out before I sit down and start writing. I know how the book ends before I write the first word. So when I start to write, I'll put in an hour and a half and go, well, golf doesn't play itself. But as I get deeper into the book, I spend more and more time with it. I mean, the last couple of weeks when I'm working on the book, that's all I'm doing. I mean, I'll sit down at 8 in the morning, all of a sudden it's 8 at night, and I'm going, shouldn't somebody have fed me by now? And, that's how it works. That's how I do it. Matt, I'll tell you, we know a lot of guys in the business, and I don't think I've met two that do it the same way, that have the same process.
I agree with that.
That's my experience, is that everybody has to find their own level.
The best way is the way that allows you. I go by word count every day, and when I'm writing a first draft, and it varies probably anywhere from 4 to 10 hours a day. So
I try to get, once I actually start, I try to get 5,000 words in a week.
yeah, that's a good first week.
And sometimes I actually do that.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes having the goal is the most important thing.
Yes.
Whether you hit it or not, you're driving towards something. And I think that relates to the writer's block question. Like, David has been a professional writer since he was 18. I started in my early 20s. Professional writers don't have the luxury of waiting for inspiration. You just have to plow through it. Even if it's bad, you can fix it later. Yeah.
Yeah, I would argue that if you need inspiration, you're in the wrong business.
Yeah. That's well said.
I start every day, and I write probably 2 hours a day or thereabouts, but I start every day going back over what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
And then I find that I'm doing a lot of corrections and changing around what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
That works.
That's common. Quite a few people do that.
I polish it all the time. If I write 1,000 words today, tomorrow I'll rewrite those 1,000 words and then write another 1,000. And you just keep doing this. And one of the advantages is I don't do drafts. People talk about first draft, second
I
draft.
was just going to ask you about that.
I get to the end of the book, that book is done.
Yeah.
I'll go through it one more time, make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. But the book is finished. I don't have to go back and do drafts. And I would argue the guys who sit down and write, they get to the end of the book, that's like a glorified outline. Now they got to go back and reconcile and make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, when you don't outline, your first draft is your outline.
And how many drafts do you end up with on an average?
Well, from beginning to being published, probably 6 or 7. Yeah.
So there's two very divergent approaches, and obviously they both work with two very successful writers. And that's it. It's interesting. We never. People always say, "How do you do it? How do you sit down and write?" That's a question that I get a lot from people who want to write. I have a story, and I want to get my story out. And I just say, sit down and start.
Yeah. I've taught occasionally at the university and at the Loft Literary Center. And one of the things I will tell the students is whatever works for you is a good way. And the best way to learn how to write a novel is to sit down and write a novel. But you got to be careful, because whatever system you come up with, you're stuck with it. An example I like to use is Kruger, William Kent Kruger. Now, he would get up an hour and a half early every morning and go to the St. Clair broiler down on Snelling and St. Clair.
With his yellow pad.
Well, I think he used college notebooks, with the thing, but whatever he used, he would write for an hour and a half. Then he'd get on the bus and he'd go to work. I think he was at the university then, but don't hold me to that. Anyway, things went well. He was able to retire, going to write full time. He's going to sit at home. Can't do it. Literally cannot do it, because that's not how he taught himself to write a book. So he would go back to the St. Clair broiler with his notepads and would write. In booth number 5,
Yeah.
I actually went to booth number 5. I was having trouble with the book. Didn't do me a damn bit of good. But you know, that's the system. And now, of course, St. Clair broiler's been closed for a couple of years. But he goes to coffee houses
Yeah.
and stuff like this. And I keep telling him, one of these days I'm going to show up at the coffee house. And I'm going to go, that's William Ken Kruger sitting there working on a book. That doesn't frighten him at all, because that would require me getting up early in the morning, and that's not going to happen. But yeah, that's, you know, you got to be careful. Now, like I told you, when I wrote my first book, I used outlines because writing time was at a premium, and I had to make sure, you know, I couldn't just sit there and wing it. When I sold my agency, after my first book came out and things were going my way, I sold my agency to my partner, and now I'm going to do freelance and I'm going to write at home. So I'm not going to have outlines. I don't need outlines. I couldn't do it. It took me 13 months to write my 3rd book, and the only way I finished it was I actually, after a while, just sat down and outlined the entire book as if I hadn't written a word. And then went back and rewrote it to fit the outline.
You got in the habit of doing it?
And that's you know, that's my habit. They're not nearly as specific as they were, my outlines. They're not really as detailed as they were. It's a lot more loose, a lot more of a living document, but I still have to have that.
And you know going in how it ends.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, did stand-up help you writing in terms of your writing?
It did help in a couple of...
I mean, it got you to Hollywood.
It got me to Hollywood. Stand-up is really all about economy of words.
Yeah.
And so you really learn to cut the fat, because the more you have, the longer you have between laughs. So I learned a lot about that, and there's also great value in rewriting that you learn as a stand-up. You have an idea for a joke, you write it, you try it. Next time you're on stage, you tweak it a little bit, you move a word here, change a word there. And so it really taught me that whatever you're working on, it can get better. It'll get better. Yeah.
And there is a certain lightness to Nils Shapiro.
There is,
has
to
a
his
sense
voice.
of humor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I try to have humor in my books, but humor that's organic to the characters and to the situation. And really, a lot of the funniest TV shows over the last 20 years have also been the darkest TV shows. And the humor has been in reaction to that darkness, whether it's Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or The Wire. Those shows can be very funny.
Now, moving on, as we say, what about humor in your books? Does it come naturally?
Something the old man told me many years ago. Just because something's important doesn't mean it's serious.
Yeah.
And the thing with Mackenzie is, now, unlike Taylor, now I have 2 series. Now, Taylor is a traditional trench coat detective, Sam Spade.
Holland Taylor, we're talking about.
Yes, and Mackenzie isn't. Mackenzie is a unlicensed PI who's doing this stuff for fun, not for profit. So his books are a lot lighter in tone. I mean, there are crimes that take place, and there are, you know, very serious moments and gunshots and people dying. But there's a lightness in the tone to it, because he's not being forced to do it. This isn't his job. This isn't his vocation. He's not a police officer. So his humor is much lighter, and you'll find that most of it comes from him making fun of himself.
Self-deprecating
yeah.
humor.
his inner voice telling him, well, that was stupid, that sort of thing.
Sometimes things just fall into place. Like I mentioned, I'm writing about censorship and book banning right now. So I have a woman who started, as a matter of fact, there's a famous author who started a bookstore. It's been publicized recently, but I had an author who started a bookstore, and I couldn't think of a name for it. And she's against book banning. So she came up with this name, Band-Aid, B-A-N-N-E-D hyphen A-I-D. That's the name of her bookstore.
Okay.
It just fell in. I mean, I think that it really worked. And of course, she got sued by Johnson & Johnson because of Band-Aids.
No. That wouldn't have happened. I worked in advertising for a long time. And, you also get some in books occasionally. The copyright laws and copyright rules.
So if I gave you a draft of that, you would have X'd it out.
No, I would have, no, that's fine. That's out of context. You're not selling a product that's made to close wounds. I mean, it's a different thing. It depends on how it is used. But you probably would get away with that in real life.
So, are you working on your next one already, or your next
I
several?
am always working on one. Right now, the ideas I have are just really awful. But something will come to me. Matt will tell you, the ideas come to you sometimes accidentally. Like I'll be sitting there thinking, identity is one of the reoccurring themes in my books, who we are, how we become the people we are. And I'll have that in the back of my head, and then I'll remember, some guy robbed a bank in Boston 50 years ago and poof, disappeared. He became the inspiration for the Thomas Crown affair. The U.S. Marshals chased this guy for 50 years. And they found him because he died. And something in his obituary alerted the marshals. I don't know if it was his birth date or whatever it was. I tried to find out. They wouldn't answer my calls. And they went and they talked to the family, and the family admitted that on his deathbed, this guy confessed that he robbed this bank. $284,000, and this is back when that was real money. Yeah. Started a new identity, got married, started a business, raised a family, pillar of the community. And I had that in my head for years. And then something happened, and I go, oh. And I met a person, I go, oh. And it comes out. And that became In a Hard Wind, which is a book that's out right now. This book, my sister-in-law, my step-niece, my brother's stepdaughter, were at Christmas party, and she told me she found a guy in the water dead. He drowned in a marina. And that she had been interviewed by insurance companies and the cops and all this sort of thing, and she never found out what happened. And I look at her, and I look at her, oh, Janet, that's like one of the best Christmas gifts I've ever had. So that's the book. Okay, that's it. That's what happens. That's the first page of the book. Now, what's it about? And then you just take it from there. Everybody, again, has their own way of doing things.
What's on the drawing board for you?
Well, I have 2 books coming out in 2025, and they're written. One is another standalone with my publisher, Forge. One is a historical fiction that has some crime in it, set in the 1920s. And I'm currently working on what will come out in 2026.
Do you go on book tours
Yes.
after your book is out?
This book releases on the 21st. Forge was nice enough to let me do a release party here the night before, and then I'm heading out on book tour Tuesday morning.
What about you, David?
Not as much as when I first started. I'm not as good at the business of writing as some of my friends and colleagues. I'll have about 8, 9 signings when in Man in the Water comes out at the end of June. But that'll be about it. And partly it's because it's summer.
And I think that's more the norm now. Certainly the public appearances for books almost completely went away during COVID, and it's been slow coming back.
Yeah. When I was published in the fall, and then later on when they shifted me to the spring, you would get nice crowds. Now maybe that's a Midwest thing, maybe that's a Minnesota thing. But you come out in the middle of June, end of June, July, it's
People want to be outside.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
get don't get the same return, if you will. But it's part of the business. It's what you
If
do.
you're on the East Coast, you could set up on one of the beaches and
You can open up your trunk and
Yeah.
put a sign up and go, hey.
Well, we've been talking with both Matt Goldman and David HOUSEWRIGHT, and it's always really interesting to pick your brains a little bit and hear about the process and the procedure and of your both very successful and disparate careers. I mean, yours started out in newspapers, yours started out as stand-up and then in television. And it's just amazing and it's interesting. And also to hear the different methods that you use or that work for you in the writing of books. And this is coming out, Still Waters is coming out, Man in the Water is, Still Waters is coming out on Tuesday.
May 21st.
May 21st of 2024. Man in the Water, which should have been out already, is coming out June 26th?
25th.
25th.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you both really very much, especially Matt, who came in at the last minute and
Good timing.
jumped in here, but it was good timing. It worked out. And David, I will probably send you something for you to read. And
Don't
you can
do
tear-
it.
you
Don't do it. You know what happened the last time.
You can tear it to shreds. And then it ends up as a finalist. So
Finalists in what? I mean, come on.
the Eric Hoffer Awards.
I don't know what that is.
But it's one of the book of competitions. And, who
I
knows?
should look into that.
Thank you both very much.
Thanks for having us.
And look for us again next month.